Is that watch worth the price they are asking? This is perhaps the most often asked question by watch collectors, and one I've often struggled with. What contributes to the cost and therefore an appropriate price for a watch? Let's discuss on this episode of Adventures with Time. Hello, fellow watch enthusiasts. If you're a regular viewer of my channel, you know that I'm fairly new to watch collecting, having been into this hobby for just about 3 years. As I review watches, whether those lent to me for review or watches I'm considering for a purchase, I try to evaluate whether the price of the watch is appropriate, but sometimes I'm not sure of the answer. During this video, I'll discuss some of the attributes of a watch I use in trying to determine if a watch price is appropriate, and I'll highlight some of the issues I've had in doing this type of appraisal. Although this is a video, I'm looking for you to provide your thoughts and ideas as we continue to explore this topic in the comments below. To focus our discussion on this question, I'm talking about new watches from an authorized retailer. Gray market, resales, and vintage watches are an entirely different set of questions. And of course, I'm not considering high horology pieces. Mostly, I'm talking about watches under $5,000 US. And it's important to note that we need to ask these questions based on the price you will pay for the watch, which may change over time. This is a situation common to micro-brand watches, which often have a time-limited launch or early bird price. The price of the watch will increase over time. One needs to consider what price you will pay when trying to consider if it's worth the price. With that in mind, let's walk through a set of watch attributes and discuss the ones I believe have the greatest impact on the cost to produce a watch and therefore will drive the price of that watch. After that, I want to illustrate how problematic it is for me to evaluate watch prices. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell icon so you're informed as soon as I publish any new videos. I really appreciate your support. Let's start with case material. Of course, precious metal cases will drive up the price of a watch, and I believe the same is true with other materials such as titanium. But most watches with which I'm familiar are made from 316L stainless steel. There are some watches which only state stainless steel and may be the lower quality 304L. Some higher-end watches are made using 904L stainless steel. I know that Omega, Rolex, and Ball uses 904L for some of their watches. From what I've read, the cost difference between 316L and 904L is not significant, but given the increased hardness of 904L, the milling of the case may create a higher manufacturing cost. Going hand in hand with case material is case finishing. In most watch reviews, a lot of attention is given to how a case is finished. These can include the level of the polished surfaces like Suratsu polishing or black polishing. Also examined is the crispness of case lines, as with the edges on case bevels. But aside from these publicized high-end finishing processes and the other extreme where imperfections are easily noted, I find it hard to evaluate the good results seen on many watches, and therefore to determine if the finishing on a specific watch drives up the cost, especially if there is no finishing methodology provided in the watch specifications. How much do you consider finishing and determine value of a watch? And how do you evaluate the level of finishing a watch has? Another potential impact in cost is the dial. Watch dials can be made from many different materials, including painted metal, ceramic, plastic, and enamel. Several specialty dials, such as meteorite, are seen more these days. Another cost factor in the dial may be the applied markers and the finishing those markers exhibit. I imagine getting a great finish on small elements like these may be very costly to achieve. Similarly, depending upon the composition and texture of the dial, detailed printing may be problematic. The type and amount of lume is another factor, as is the complexity of the dial, such as with multi-layered or sandwich dials. And although not technically part of the dial, hands can increase manufacturing costs, both in their intricacy and how they are finished. And when considering major cost factors in a watch, I would think that the movement is perhaps the greatest. And I'm ignoring in-house movements for now. Evaluating a movement's impact on watch costs can start with the base movement in the watch. And there are several factors to consider beyond just the movement, manufacturer, and model. Take the Sellita 210 movement. This movement is available in a few finishes and 4 different grades, which can determine the testing and adjustments performed to provide different levels of accuracy. Often watch specifications will include this information, especially to tout use of higher grade movements. Knowing the exact movement used may not be sufficient to determine the cost impact. Often a movement is embellished with custom engraving, or perhaps more relevant to our discussion, additional modules are integrated to implement specific complications. These are just what I consider to have the greatest cost impacts. Other cost elements may include caseback, crystals, any anti-reflective coatings, straps, and/or bracelets. Even storage boxes can add to the cost of a watch. By the way, although nicely finished wooden boxes are a treat, they usually end up on a shelf never to be seen again. Therefore, I prefer something minimal to keep the cost down. There are also factors that contribute to the cost that have nothing to do with the manufacturing process. These could be warranty, supply and demand, and brand heritage or reputation. These to me are very difficult to appraise as to how they impact the value of a watch. In fact, other than movement, I find it hard to evaluate how a watch's attributes factor into the price. With movements, one can look up movement prices and get at least a rough idea on relative costs. For example, with a quick search on the internet, I know that a Sellita 210-1 standard grade movement would cost one about $190 US. However, the next grade up, which is the Elaboré, costs $310 US. But that's it for any concrete cost impacts that I can assemble. All of the other impacts, including the case and dial, come down to manufacturing costs, which are somewhat of a mystery to me. What I tend to do is look at comparables, sort of what one does to evaluate a house purchase. I start by looking for a watch with the same movement and then compare the other attributes. Let me give you an example. Look at these 3 watches, which all use the ETA 2824-2 movement and which I've owned or reviewed before. Almost a 100% cost difference between the highest and lowest priced watch here. To my knowledge, the Zenea and Squale are assembled in Switzerland and the Stova in Germany. From a specification point of view, the Stova as priced comes with a strap rather than a bracelet, does not have a bezel, has lower water resistance rating, but does have a display caseback. Also consider that Zenea is a micro brand with much less overhead than the other brands, but on the other hand produces much lower quantities of watches, which one would think increases manufacturing costs. While Squale is sold through ADs, which inject additional margin into the price of the watch, the other 2 are sold directly from the brand. So I'm still confused as to the value proposition of these 3 watches. Now throw in the Sinn 104, one of my favorite watches in my collection. The Sinn 104 uses the Sellita 220-1, which essentially is a clone of the ETA 2824-2 with the addition of a day function. Like the 2 ETA-based dive watches, it comes on a bracelet with a bezel and a display caseback, and has a water resistance rating of 200 meters. This watch currently costs $1,670 US. I could go through all the specification details between these watches, but the bottom line is that I cannot identify what drives the price difference between these watches other than brand reputation and the brand using a market-based pricing strategy rather than a cost-based strategy. Where does that leave me? Well, with 2 approaches. First, to continue my analysis of watch pricing using both a comparables methodology, but with an overarching factor of appeal. That is, first assess if the watch is priced in line with comparable watches, but influence any purchase decision by my level of interest and desire I have for the watch. And second, to seek your input on this question of value to price in the comments below. Although not optimized for such a discourse, I request you share your thoughts and your practices when trying to determine if a watch price is appropriate. Thanks for watching, and until my next video, I leave you with links to these two videos. One on Grand Seiko with a similar value proposition issue, and this other video that talks about the value proposition of the new Oris Caliber 400 in-house movement.